going to push our purposes forward, and also like dare to ask questions to others that work with us in the same ecosystem, and stop being afraid, because I think that since the resources have usually come from the north to the south, we even stop asking questions and say, why are we doing this if this is not what is needed in my country or to the people that I'm supposed to be serving?
Thank you so much, Marta. Pascal, would you like to go next?
Okay, so I have to say, even being here, I'm a little bit worried. This is a time for us to be bold, but I'm still not hearing, and there's a lot of reflection, but I'm not hearing that boldness. I'm not, maybe we're just tired, I don't know, but for half a century, global health has relied on a compact that's built on money, not neutrality. We built a system where funding defined influence and influence defined priority. That model has achieved extraordinary things, vaccines, HIV treatment, maternal health gains, but it has created a dependency, distortion and distrust. And this should be a time for us to really sit back and be energized to rebuild it. That compact has collapsed. And it's not actually not sudden. It's been 2 years of fatigue and fragmentation. Really bad I have to talk about. Multilateralism is never neutral. It reproduced hierarchies of knowledge and legitimacy, deciding on whose science counted, whose suffering merited attention, and whose solutions were fundable. The very term beneficiary tells us who was expected to receive and who was expected to decide. That structure is ending, but what replaces it will depend on whether we learn lessons from the past. The end of aid is not the end of solidarity, or should not be the end of solidarity. The withdrawal of traditional donors does not mean the end of collective action. It is a chance to rebuild a system based on reciprocity, regional leadership, and shared accountability. Across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, new alliances are already taking shape. The African Union's Lusaka Agenda, the ASEAN Regional Research Consortium, Latin America's Feminist Health Diplomacy. These are not aid models, they are solidarity compacts grounded in mutual investment. Private capital, philanthropy, and diaspora funding will play larger roles. But diversified funding without diversified governance will simply reproduce the same imbalances, but just with new actors. This is why regional scorecards, transparent costed plans, and public participation in budget oversight are essential. We have to bring communities along. The next era of financing must measure justice as carefully as it measures dollars. And evidence will be the new currency. We have to make it the new currency. With fiscal power, when fiscal power disperses, the legitimacy to lead will depend on who holds credible evidence. Institutions that maintain rigor, openness, and trust in science will shape policy far beyond their budgets. And this is where the role of WHO and HRP becomes central, providing global public goods, data, standards, and guidance that any country can adopt, adapt, and own. Rejecting science cannot become the new sovereignty, and evidence is not a colonial artifact, it is a collective safeguard against this. Trust will determine survival. In a recent Lancet commentary with Raja Khosla and myself, we wrote that trust is the essential currency of global health. It's hard to build, but easy to lose. People no longer automatically trust institutions to protect their rights or tell them the truth. Some of that mistrust is deserved. We have been slow to acknowledge harms done in the name of progress. But trust can be rebuilt through transparency, through humility and inclusion, and through showing that evidence serves people and not politics. And we need to decide when we are observers of a process and where we can actively exert influence. And the UN80 process, I think, is going to be an important one to watch in this respect. And this is where history will judge us. So the future of global health without the old funding structures will not be poorer if we replace money with mutual accountability, science with conscience, and power with partnership. And the end of aid can be the beginning of a more honest multilateralism, one that values local agency as much as global expertise, and dignity as much as efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pascal. Esther, I move on to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I have to start with an apology. Usually I'm a free speaker and reading disturbs me, but the yesterday plenary left me so furious that I had to write down my thoughts. So I will read, but I will speak and read. I want to start with a personal and professional note. And legitimacy. I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm a 52 years old woman. All in my life, I took care of contraception and fertility. I'm a human rights lawyer, and we preach about transparency and inclusion and dignity. If we truly want to dismantle destructive power structures, those rooted in patriarchy, ideology, manipulative state control, and ideology-based entrenched inequalities that includes the continue to privilege man, we must begin looking inward at our own institutions and within our own. I deeply and truly value this space we have here today, and the leadership and solidarity of those standing with the SRHR movement, including the financial support we need from those who are still standing. Yet, yesterday was painful, and I literally felt like a punch in the stomach. Man after man after man, 7 of 8 political speakers, and one brilliant artist speaking for 1 minute from Ethiopia, telling us how to make contraception available to save women from dying from childbirth and on and on. Only after did women take the stage, after 90 minutes, and Martha with the show, and the right to dancing saving the floor. Equity is not only about access, it's about politics, strategy, and power. And yesterday, I missed the voices too often silent, those of the women, the sex workers, the amaranta, the women living with disability, those who are living with HIV. I miss the courage of political leaders willing to say the full S, including women, in sexual and reproductive health and rights, the part that stands for sexuality, sexual health, sexual justice, sexual freedom, the truth that we see contraception not only to avoid childbirth, but to have pleasurable, safe sex and to make choices free and coercion. Until we leave the equality we advocate for, we will not transform the world. We need man, we need you. But you must share the power, listen, and make space for us. We love you, respect you, we adore you. I want to raise 3 points following on Pascal's points on science and evidence and how we create new space for evidence, and also following on Malika Dutt who, what, and how. Referring to my colleagues Sapna Desai from India and Sabina Rashid from Bangladesh, ongoing conversations on decolonization must question the very idea of expertise, method, and the link between knowledge and practice, which often continue to reinforce hierarchies of power, privilege, and geography. Decolonizing global health, following on Pascal's point, means reimagining research and action grounded in context, lived experience, accountability, humility, and justice. About the who. Knowledge hierarchies often exclude communities and also practitioners, human rights lawyers, and policymakers, relegating them to stakeholders rather than experts, leading on an organization with a journal, scientific journal, always excluded as experts in knowledge creation without some inspections. As Jessica Oga from Afiyanaki in Uganda, I hope Jessica you are in the room, reminds us, SRHR research in Africa context remains shaped by colonial legacies. African researchers and communities provide data, but rarely have equal authority to define priorities and interpret findings. About the what? We see many multidisciplinary teams in global health, but few initiatives led by communities most affected by rights violations. As Lucas Stevenson from NSWP and IPPF asked in a recent dinner 2 days ago, where is the research designed with sex workers on their needs? We have a lot about violence and HIV. What about our needs about abortion? A recent study published by SRHM conducted by HRP, WHO, and Pleasure Project and partners is asking us the question, where is the S in family planning? If we are not talking about the S, including by big UN agencies, why are we here today, honestly? It found that this research study found that many who discontinued contraception did so because of sexual concern, decreased libido, discomfort, issues rarely studied yet as common as cost or access. Recognizing sexual acceptability as central, not secondary to contraceptive use, call for research that centers live experiences, redistributes power, and embraces pleasure-affirming, decolonized approach to sexual and reproductive health and rights. As another example, recently at the Asfari Institute in Lebanon, women leaders from Lebanon, Syria, Mexico present, connecting with Mexico, Colombia, and Chile online, reflected on feminist power in transitional justice, how personal narrative and grassroots memory have become vital for truth, justice, and healing. Their stories show how women's voices and experiences can grow into evidence and national forces that challenge authoritarianism, influence media, and demand accountability, even in the enduring impunity and conflict, and in context of war crimes, such as using rape as a weapon of war, and in the context of genocide. And the last point is how knowledge is connected to action. We already know a lot about evidence. Comprehensive sexuality education empowers youth. Access to contraception without parental consent increases uptake. And abortion restrictions do not reduce abortions. They drive them underground, increase mortality and morbidity, and deepen inequality. Yet, misinformation and disinformation influences public and drives political decision-making. We must be brave and accountable in supporting actions that uphold evidence and human rights and taking the action. I would like to quote dear colleagues from Kenya, who just came out of the Supreme Court most recently in Kenya. And we can learn from their examples, such as Kalin and IRAP in Kenya, who challenged the National Reproductive Health Policy 2022-2032 before the High Court of Kenya for being discriminatory and unconstitutional, requiring parental consent for adolescent and young people to access reproductive health services, and mandating HIV testing. The case stood firmly on the principles of evidence, the Maputo Protocol, and the Kenyan constitutions. Yet, it was dismissed in 3 grounds except on abortion. And as a last point, I reached out yesterday, our dear colleagues from Uganda, the health commissioner, and I said that I so much would like to quote you as a good example on reducing maternal mortality, taking the constitutional court decision as a Ministry of Health and reporting to the parliament. But how can I do so if you are still criminalizing abortion and same-sex sexual orientation? How can we dismantle maternal mortality from abortion and sexual orientation?
Yeah, thank you so much, Esther. I'll hand over to Bing, please.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you, everyone. So from someone who is from the Global South, an activist from the Global South, I will start with something that we already know, for everyone, activists that are in the room. In the context of continuing to imagine SRHR beyond aid, equity, and decolonization, we have to acknowledge, and we know, and we understand the colonial origins of foreign aid. The roots of international development aid are colonial and strategically designed to maintain the influence, control market, and shape governance in post-colonial states. We know this. We know this. This is a fact that is already there. And this is true to all of the former colonies, including my country, the Philippines. In early population programs, they were supported by global powers that it were managing third world fertility in ensuring not ensuring reproductive rights, but it was designed to control the population. In the 1970s, the funded coercive sterilization was really true across the world, including in my country, in the Philippines, and my mother was one of them who was forcibly sterilized during that time. Aid has long served to reproduce north-south hierarchies with donors imposing priorities that align with their own moral, religious, or economic agendas and not about the community needs. And we know, we've seen how the global gag rule of the US, that it didn't just block the funding for abortion. It dictated policies in many, many countries, and it will continue to do so with the expanded global gag rule. That's the colonial power with impunity and an abashed exercise of hegemonic power. That has been happening, and it's always been happening. Second point that we also already know, the acknowledgement of the structural racism in SRHR funding. SRHR funding has always been about who gets funded and who speaks at the global forums. Black, brown, indigenous, trans, poor, women-led organizations are always been underfunded and scrutinized. The research by the Architecture of Change, Feminist Pathways of Financing Gender Equality highlighted the inherent racism and hypocrisy of Western nations in promoting feminist and gender equality-focused foreign policy, while at the same time continuing to profit off the arms trade being used to actively destroy the communities of the same community that they are supporting. Can you imagine? That's how it was actually. So these are something that we already know, and we wanted to dismantle it. How to make it real? How do we dismantle all these? We know that there is that push, call, demands by the movement to let them decide where the funding goes. Instead of donors making all the decision and design the programs, it should be rooted from the realities on the ground. And I can say, as IPPF staff member, that for our MAs, for example, we're recognized in their business plans, and we are supporting the lived realities of the communities that they are serving. It is not dictated by the IPPF, but their business planning are designed by them. We do have due diligence. It is necessary, but it is coming from the place of support rather than conditions. So this is how we dismantle it. We have to always support. If resources don't respect our autonomy, our politics, our reality, then they don't serve our movement. So why are we actually really, working with them? And to dismantle, we also have to give trust-based long-term support. I am from a grassroots community. Apart from being IPPF, I'm also a member and has established a decriminalization for abortion a movement in the Philippines. And we do have a track record of transforming SRHR policy at country level. We have decades of working in this. So donor regime has to trust the community knowledge, all the transformation that has been done by them. The local movement are on it in a long haul. So, you know, small support could help, yes, but it would not sustain the work. We also know that by dismantling all of this thinking is that we have to fund across movements. It has to be connected because our struggles are connected. The attacks on abortion rights are also attacks to democracy, bodily autonomy, and justice. We have to, this actually means that we need to share funding with other movements. We don't need to work in silos. We have to raise money together. We need to build systems together. And we have already been, building this. So we've seen this in all of the work that we're doing on the ground. Make funding political. It should be a transformative in its sense. SRHR is not neutral, as we know. It has always been political. But the question is, whose politics? Whose power? And so hence, as activists, we are demanding justice. We demand a shift to funding that is explicitly feminist, rooted in rights and bodily autonomy, that is based in lived realities and responsive to the needs of the people. It should be reparative. It must address the historical and ongoing harm, not just to deliver services. It shouldn't be performative. And so, as IPPF, we are turning data into power, to demand accountability, to pressure governments, to challenge donors, and make that, the case that funding restrictions it kills people. SRHR movements are not just service providers, we are political actors. And so as IPPF, we are documenting the harms caused by funding cuts and ideological aid, such as clinic closures, increased maternal deaths, lost access to contraceptives, among others, including the silencing of women human rights defenders and abortion rights groups. And in closing, IPPF strategically demand that we have to fund justice. It shouldn't be just physical adjustment, that we must move beyond precarious official development assistance. We have to denounce that barriers to dignity and care, and it should not be rooted in flawed financing models. SRHR is a strategic investment. It is not an optional aid. We call for immediate action for sustainable development financing, progressive tax reform, prioritization of care economy to build national budgets capable of withstanding external political shock. As we know, it has not always been privileged, including SRHR. It is non-negotiable right. And funding, as we know, this is, the discussion about funding, it should be funded. The question is no longer, who can we afford to fund SRHR? It's no longer that question, but who benefits from not funding it? And yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bing, and thank you all for those very, I think, insightful discussions on the funding and how do we tip the balance of power when it comes to funding, challenge it, to create solidarity and trust amongst movements. I think my second question is really around how we do that without replicating the old power structures. Because we know that this is a failure that we can fall into, because those power structures are entrenched. They're entrenched in our minds, they're entrenched in our societies, entrenched in the institutions, and they are not disconnected from the macro issues. They're connected to imperialism, they're connected to capitalism, and they're connected to where money is and where it flows. So my question is really, how do we create that future of SRHR that is grounded in this shared accountability, solidarity, and justice, while also doing so while dismantling these power structures that disadvantage the people that are impacted the most by sexual and reproductive health and rights? for that question, I think I'll leave it as you, whoever wants to.
I can go, yeah. Huh. The how. I think that starts by something it sounds very simple, but I also believe it's radical, and it has to do with listening differently. Being willing to share knowledge and power. And I wonder how many high-level decision makers are in this room. How many donors are listening to the advice that we are trying to provide? How many of us have had long conversations trying to connect with what we see happens locally and how decisions are being made globally at the North? So for us, listening differently. And I also have to share that when we as an organization have been able to bridge that rigid set of structures and norms and policies, because usually that's what we get. Even when you sit down to negotiate with a government, not the policy, the rules. You know that here in Colombia, it is mandatory to carry out popular consultations. That means that for most of the programs, not only health, but energetic, whatever, it is mandatory to go to the towns, to the population that are going to benefit with the program, and a popular consultation has to be carried out. What we've seen happens over and over again, and this applies to everyone, okay, is that we sit down, we give a lot of feedback. It is important to take this into account, let's do that. And also because we get the feedback from the population. And when we see the policy or the program, nothing of what we have, discussed over the weeks, it's there. So for me, we really need to push this idea of how can we sit down in a room where we feel, we as civil society organizations, we as citizens of a country, feel that there is a difference in what the people with power and money are listening. I think that also when it comes to co-create this future, I think that we really need to understand that everything co-create means working with people in the territory. And again, this is written in most of the high-level decisions and funds and philanthropies. We are there for the people and we build things with them. But when it comes to the how, it's just not working that way. It's just not happening, because you come out again with all these ideas and say, no, because this does not comply with this, or these are words or programs, abortion is not, on our bylaws, so let's not go into that. So again, we have to give meaning to what co-creation means. Co-creation means sitting down on a table in a room at the same level, not just as implementers. And I also, Esther, what you mentioned, I think there is something very strong in, really valuing different types of knowledge. In the case, again, what I have as an example to share is how we do it in Pro Familia, but these are real examples. For us, the experience of a midwife in rural Colombia or of a young migrant woman at the border is as important as a technical person who is designing a policy at the Ministry of Health, because they are the ones that are going through, different issues in their life. So valuing different type of knowledge, I think, is extremely important if we really want to move ahead and try to do things differently. And also something that we talk a lot about, capacity building. I think that how can we move from capacity building to mutual learning? Because what I've seen is that capacity many times is already there, but it just hasn't been recognized or provided with resources. So I think that there's something there also on the capacity building and capacity install that we also need to evolve on what it means and how to get there.
Thank you.
So just, no comprehensive strategy yet, but I just thought that I mentioned 3 points, and I also feel that monitoring is very important, but what monitoring means without action. And I grew up in communism and socialism in Hungary, and communism had many bad sides, but I was also the generation of pioneers who had to survive in the forest for 48 hours without help. I feel like these 10 years of pioneer of myself, how to be creative action. And let me quote some people, and Alvaro, I hope you don't mind. I'm not extracting. I'm following on your brilliant ideas. Again, the same dinner where Luca was asking about research. Alvaro said that, what about bold action of imagining, instead of defending, imagining a new program of action on ICPD after 3 years? What would be in that action, even if instead of monitoring how many more states are signing on the Geneva, these are my thoughts, the Geneva Consensus document, what about our bold action? And Alvaro said, even if states are not signing on, can we just use our imagination? The other point is the Porto Proclamation that was the World Association of Sexual Health with Partners put forward. We didn't have the money at WAS and partners, but we brought together organizations in September defending the sexual health, justice and rights framework instead of staying quiet, imagining that how collective power can look like, and keep meeting and keeping the agenda alive. And the third one is, instead of being sad about how evidence is disappearing, the importance of evidence is disappearing in the context of disinformation and misinformation and ideology-based misuse. What about of revoking the right to science, the right to benefit of scientific progress that has been enshrined in the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that has been evoked in a beautiful report last year by the Special Rapporteur on Culture? What about that we write on the right to science and reinstate that it is a human right? We need the evidence, we need rights and evidence-based knowledge, and it is a matter of accountability, not a choice.
Yeah, no, thank you. So on this, I would like to kind of like look into accountability as a matter of solidarity. So we cannot speak of accountability without also looking into, as you've already mentioned in your opening earlier, about what's the injustices that are happening around us. We cannot ignore the fact that as we are already here, genocide, occupation, militarization is ongoing, from Palestine to Sudan to Congo to Myanmar to Haiti to Tanzania, that has been, you know, in a very precarious situation in the past days. It is happening. So we cannot speak of accountability without acknowledging that. If institutions, including the UN and other multilateral organizations, remain silent, while our communities, including our own communities, we bury our deads, human rights become performative rather than it is a principle for everyone should have. It is veering away from our very mandate and our very purpose of serving the people. We know what the contexts are. We have been talking about that over and over, from our own organizations to the spaces around here. We've heard how it wasn't also acknowledged so much in the space. But for the accountability to be real, I also wanted to draw into, you know, Luca's point, and also Nico's from our community engagement and partnerships thoughts around this. Accountability and mutual support as practiced by feminist, queer, indigenous, disability, migrant, youth movements are built already. They have already the infrastructure of care and resistance. They are in the communities of defense networks, women rights defenders. They are already doing rapid response solidarity funds. They are in the spaces of, you know, transforming policies, etc. So it is really about, grounding our work in justice, demanding accountability that is based on justice, that is rising from the realities of the grassroots, that is actually really coming out from the perspectives and the leadership of the global South. We are, and of course, when I say this, like that leadership, that, that accountability, and that those people we exist to serve, we are also the same people. We are those people. We are integral part of those communities and movements that we are serving. No one of us here are part of the 1%, isn't it? Or are they? But the point being is that when we talk about accountability and community, we are part of that community. We are not actually othering that community, like we are serving the community as we have, because we don't also have. And so we have to deliberately ask, how can we talk about equity in action without ensuring that our services reach the most marginalized communities? And as Lucas actually really, stressed so much on me, like the vast majority of our sex workers are mothers, LGBT people, and also migrants with diverse needs, from contraceptives to care, access to abortion, to HIV care, mental health support, gender-based violence. They are subjected to all of these violations. But sex workers also teach us as fighting for more inclusive SRH services also mean tackling the entrenched system of domination and exclusion. We have been fighting for this, a feminist inclusion of sex workers in our spaces. They have been excluded. And that's not being accountable, right? We have been talking about feminism, we have been talking about inclusion, but we are othering people. So concretely, IPPF is working with communities, not as beneficiaries. We know that they lead and change, and the care that they are doing with their own communities. Communities know what justice looks like for them and for us all. And they have been deprived of it for so long, and yet the absence is what makes them feel more and more and know it more. Because of that sense of, injustice, they know for a fact what justice should be. Communities are the authors of their own resistance and the authors of what justice is for them. And so that's what we are doing as IPPF. We are forming partnership and working in solidarity with them. And just to plug also, there's a lot more to say about, the community and community work, but just to plug also that tomorrow there is going to have a sex worker-led event, Breaking Dawn, Breaking Barriers, Sex Worker Consortium at the Heart of Reproductive Justice. It will be at 7 a.m. That's why it's called Breaking Dawn. It is about bridging global regional perspectives, feminist solidarity, and creative intervention, and to expound more about how are we going to center sex workers in transforming health systems and strengthening justice movements. And yes, we can talk about more and more about accountability, but the point being is that we need to be more accountable to the people that we serve. Thank you.
Pascal, can we come to you before we open for Q&A?
Okay, so I just want to focus a little bit. We've raised a lot of issues, but I'm just reading again the title of the session. And I guess the question is, how do we build trust and accountability in global health when the financial architecture that has held it together is what we are trying to interrogate and trying to break apart? Much of the discussions on decolonization still come with moving resources southward or elevating local voices. Now, both of these are essential, but not sufficient. Our critiques, again, I think I mentioned this before, they touch on only one side of the mirror. We have to look at ourselves. The other side of the mirror is our own participation The way ministries, universities, and researchers still orient their work towards external validation, because this is where the money and legitimacy reside. True decolonization will require shared accountability, where northern actors must stop using funding as control, and southern actors must build the institutional confidence to define and defend their own priorities. We have to move towards a new ecosystem of trust. The greatest casualty of the last decade has been trust. Trust in donors, in multilaterals, and even in science itself. The erosion is not accidental. Decisions about people's bodies, still, in the work that we do, whether it's IPPF, WHO, and so on, a lot of the decisions about people's bodies, the programming, all of that, are made very far away from those bodies. Funding shaped priorities more than the evidence did. And to rebuild trust, we have to design institutions that are transparent, predictable, and humble. If we don't take advantage of this chaos to rebuild, we are just going to be having these same conversations in whatever world there is in another 5 years, well, another 2 years. So we have to be transparent. We have to be transparent in how evidence is generated and how money flows. We have to be predictable in upholding human rights, even where geopolitics shift. We have to be humble in recognizing that knowledge and innovations are already thriving in every region. This means sharing power where decisions are made. Representation on advisory bodies and review committees is not enough if the authority to allocate resources remains unchanged. Co-creation means co-design. Regional bodies manage pooled funding, national researchers leading multi-country studies, communities defining successful indicators. We're trying in the HRP co-sponsoring model, for instance, where we've got 5 UN agencies with independent scientific and civil society oversight, and we have IPPF as well on our board, to show that distributed authority is possible. Financing the future has to be different. As traditional aid recedes, new actors are entering. Regional development banks, private capital, diaspora networks, and domestic treasuries. But diversified funding without diversified accountability will simply recreate the old hierarchies with new faces. We need financing models that tie investment to results on equity and rights, not just service numbers. We need to reward countries that protect SRHR in national budgets. We need to build sustainable epistemic infrastructure, regional journals, data platforms, and training institutions so that evidence is genuinely produced and valued locally. A future beyond aid that ignores gender and sexuality is merely geopolitics in new clothing. Decolonization that leaves patriarchy and heteronormativity intact is not liberation, it is reshuffle. SRHR must remain our moral compass, where women, adolescents, LGBTQ+ people, and marginalized groups can claim care and autonomy without fear. And humility. I keep saying this, and it's so much grounded in well, pushing it to be grounded in the work and in the current reform of within WHO and across the UN. Co-creating this future will require humility from every actor in the system. From the North, recognizing that resources do not equal wisdom. From the South, acknowledging that autonomy brings responsibility for rigor and results. And from multilaterals like WHO, continuing to serve as custodians of evidence and standards, and not as gatekeepers of power.
Thank you so much, Pascal. I'll now open the floor for questions. We have around, hopefully, 10 minutes before they ask us to leave the room. So, sorry? Yeah, questions or comments, reflections, please, we want you to engage with that vision. Yes. And
Hi, I'm Dr. Yasmin Kazi from Pakistan and have been in this field and can, I can hear the frustration, and I think frustration is always welcome because, you know, if you are frustrated, then you know the things are not happening the way it should be. But what makes me feel positive and listening to all of you, it was a great, kind of a testimonies, the experiences that you have shared, that I feel that despite of that ODA shrinking and the landscape going down, it provides us with the opportunity to emerge and see that what can we do at South to South collaboration, what can we do as a community to make the work that we want to do and we care for. So I think this is also an opportunity we should be looking at, and by looking at all the champions, that's what I'm trying to do even in my own country, that how can we collect our collective voices, and especially taking the voices from the field with the lived experiences in the co-designing, in co-creating the advocacy messages. So I feel that, you know, with the, how do we continue with the equity and decolonization is something very real for us at the moment. It has always been, but I think at this point, we need to have that. And what make me feel optimistic is the kind of the leadership, the women leadership, and I share your frustration when you said they were all men speaking yesterday about family planning, telling women what to do. And you know, it's always, I mean, this is my fight in my own country. I walk to Ministry of Health and I see all men on the table talking of contraceptive and of course pushing up abortion under the table and all that kind of struggles that we feel. Though women in leadership position, women in global health as champions, as local champions are going to be the key, and we should all be investing in that trajectory if we really want the needle to move. Thank you.
Can you pass the microphone back, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Patricia from STADA Kenya, a grassroots organization based in Kenya. Mine is a comment. Thank you so much for those beautiful presentations. Mine is a comment on the transition. Part of us imagining this new or imagining work beyond aid is we have to realize that it's a transition. And for it to be a proper transition, we have to begin to challenge how funding looks like now. Part of that transition needs to factor in the fact that we need to be able to fund organizations to be able to learn, to be able to get themselves to build their capacity or enhance their capacity around how they can be able to get to support their programs outside of aid. So I was hearing a lot on the whole concept of social enterprising, and that is truly the future. It is what has sustained us, because we, as a young organization, you barely get funding. No one wants to fund you. But part of what has sustained us is us having gotten into the space of social enterprising and consultancies so that we are able to fund projects. But I do realize that that requires skill. And part of us as a transition, and every donor in this space, my challenge to you is that you begin to fund capacity, begin to fund learning, begin to fund get out of the normal ways of funding and fund organizations in a way that they're able to stand sustainability. Because part of the funding that we have is, I think it's just, we are over-reliant on funding just because that is how the structure has always been. And part of decolonization is us realizing that past you funding a project, can this project still continue for the next 10 years outside of that aid? And I believe aid is still very much needed, but we need to be able to diversify. And in our journey of diversification, we have to recognize that there's a big responsibility that donors have to play towards that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm Harjot Khosa. I'm from IPPF South Asia office. Very happy to sit here and listen to all my dear friends. But I have a little small introspection and a retrospection. Coming here just a week before, we had our gender equality, equity policy. And in that discussion, I was so motivated that yes, our policy is built on decolonization, and we are talking about anti-racism. However, I just want to say one thing. I don't want to use the word global South. I'll rather say we from South Asia, we are not monolith. You cannot think that there's a big stone and we will just break it. We come from a region which is politically unstable. Currently, no government in Bangladesh and Nepal. And don't get me started on Iran and Afghanistan. And two things that we need to think when we are talking about equity, we are having an extreme right-wing uproar. And the feeling of ethno-nationalism and extremism is getting into every household. You talk to a young boy, what do you want? I want a religious fundamentalist. I want a nation which is built like from India, we want a Hindu nation, you know? That's the kind of ideologies that we are dealing. And then we go to them and talk. So I think we all need to push. And thank you so much for having this dialogue. Little emotional.
Hola, ¿aquí? ¿Sí? Bueno, buenos días. Voy a hablar en español, precisamente porque estamos en una sesión sobre decolonialismo en América Latina. Agradecerles por este panel, me parece que es muy importante que nos demos un espacio formal en el programa para discutir estrategias de descolonización. Les decía que vengo de Uruguay y a mí me parece muy importante instalar esta idea de que necesitamos descolonizar nuestras mentes, nuestras prácticas académicas. Yo vengo del ámbito académico. Luego de haber pasado muchos años en el campo de la sociedad civil, fundé organizaciones feministas en Uruguay y hoy trabajo en la academia desarrollando esta agenda. Y necesitamos pensar de otra manera, decolonizar el mundo académico, decolonizar el mundo del ámbito de la incidencia social y política en los territorios, decolonizar, por supuesto, las estrategias de financiamiento, las estrategias de publicación de resultados científicos. Ahí tenemos un enorme desafío para que la agenda de derechos sexuales y reproductivos efectivamente reconozca, ponga en valor las capacidades locales que hemos desarrollado. Y que esas capacidades locales no se miden desde estándares internacionales exclusivamente. Porque desde esa perspectiva siempre va a haber un déficit en los territorios, en las organizaciones sociales, en los académicos o las académicas que trabajamos en universidades del sur, porque no hablamos perfectamente inglés, porque no tenemos un lenguaje académicamente alistado a los estándares internacionales. Esta es una discusión en el mundo académico y en el mundo social y en el activismo. Entonces, yo lo que invito es a que efectivamente tratemos de construir nuevas prácticas entre nosotros que abrazamos una causa y que efectivamente pensemos que precisamos proyectos de larga duración, efectivamente, y que, como decía la compañera de Kenia, no podemos sostener estrategias de incidencia política o de incidencia social o de incidencia académica con proyectos de corta duración, financiados de corta duración. No hay transformación de esta radicalidad que nos proponemos con financiamientos cortos, de pasos cortos. Precisamos pasos largas, miradas largas. Y eso requiere de redistribuir el poder en el uso de los recursos y localizarlos donde están realmente también los problemas. Entonces me parece que ahí hay un enorme desafío para todas, para todos, donantes, académicos, sociedad civil, actores políticos, gente que trabaja en los territorios, para todos nosotros de decolonizar nuestras mentes. Muchas gracias.
Hello, hi. My name is Violeta, and I am part of the UN advocacy team at IPPF. I'm originally from Argentina. And speaking about long-term opportunities and long-term thought, right? Pascal, you mentioned UN80, and I think that in the UN80, we have an enormous opportunity, but so far, we have been seeing that it's a wasted opportunity, at least from the civil society part. We have been completely left in the dark since the beginning, not having an opportunity to contribute to the process. And this has been the case from the task force that was created by the Secretary General, but also by allies, member states, and by the UN systems and agencies that we know that are allies and that work with us all the time. We haven't seen a lot of bravery to defend civil society voice in the UN80 process. And if we are thinking about the next 80 years of the UN, we need to be part of the conversation, and that is not happening. So.
Buenas tardes, ya creo, para todos. Carlota Ramírez, de Argentina, provincia de Buenos Aires, un poco en línea con lo que plantea la compañera de nuestro país vecino, Uruguay. También quiero hablar en español porque me sorprende que hasta el título esté en inglés, lo tengo que decir, podría haber estado en los dos idiomas. Y creo que tenemos que ampliar la discusión porque lo que estamos viendo, incluso en la presentación hablamos del genocidio de Gaza, lo que vemos, creo que tenemos que pensar el financiamiento de la salud en general y la salud reproductiva en particular, pero en relación con la discusión de cómo estamos distribuyendo los fondos, porque lo que vemos en nuestro país y en el mundo es un incremento de políticas extractivistas, un aumento grande de los presupuestos de seguridad y de guerra y achicar el presupuesto de salud y de derechos sexuales y reproductivos. Entonces creo que la discusión no puede reducirse a la cuestión del financiamiento, cómo cooperamos entre nosotros. Creo que tenemos que descolonizar nuestra manera de pensar y cómo descolonizar la política de financiamiento y pensar y hacer una discusión de si pensamos en el futuro, qué mundo queremos, porque lo que vemos es más inversión en industria de la guerra, más inversión en toda la distribución financiera. En nuestro país, por ejemplo, todos los recursos están yendo en la bicicleta financiera, como la llamamos. Entonces creo que la discusión tiene que ser en el marco más amplio de imaginarnos el mundo que queremos, porque si no hacemos esa discusión, no solamente no vamos a tener derechos sexuales y reproductivos, vamos a tener un mundo en el que no es muy agradable imaginarnos el futuro al que estamos viendo. Entonces creo que tenemos que usar la imaginación como una herramienta política, pero connect the dots, pensar las políticas de salud reproductiva en el marco de qué estamos financiando, porque también creo que es una responsabilidad de los estados garantizar la salud de la población y los derechos sexuales y reproductivos. Y los estados hoy están mirando para otro lado. Y no puede ser que sea la sociedad civil la que está resolviendo los problemas en la sociedad. Creo que tenemos que trabajar conjuntamente. Yo trabajo en el Estado, soy una trabajadora del Estado de la provincia de Buenos Aires, dirigiendo un programa de salud sexual y reproductiva, y trabajamos con la sociedad civil, pero creo que los estados tenemos responsabilidades y que la discusión tiene que ser en ese marco, de pensar qué mundo estamos construyendo y cómo pensar el financiamiento cuando los recursos están yendo a la destrucción. Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you. Just hand over to Marta and then Pascal for final comments and remarks.
Voy en español primero y me encanta, gracias por traer, y estoy totalmente de acuerdo, y somos muchos, que el manejo del idioma en la conferencia ha sido todo un desafío. Hemos hecho lo posible en donde hemos podido influenciar en algo las decisiones, pero totalmente de acuerdo, y lo que esperamos es que al haberlo hecho en Latinoamérica, la conferencia en esta ocasión, que sirva de ejemplo para las conferencias que vienen hacia adelante. Le hemos empujado bastante el tema. Creo que todas sus observaciones absolutamente en el punto, importantes, el componente que mencionabas de Naciones Unidas, totalmente de acuerdo. Esto de cómo conectamos los puntos que traen las compañeras de Latinoamérica, también muy importante, el uso de la creatividad. O sea, a dónde voy, porque no voy a resumir todo el poder de las mujeres en lo que tiene que ver en la decisión sobre nuestros cuerpos. Absolutamente, cada una de las observaciones en el punto. Y lo que quisimos como panel fue que esto fuera, comenzar a darle forma a una discusión que no es la primera vez que se está dando, sino que ya ha iniciado, pero sobre todo, fíjense algo, la discusión se da en el momento en que hay esta ruptura brutal en lo que tiene que ver con los recursos. Porque había muchos movimientos, sobre todo en Latinoamérica, ya veníamos hablando del problema de cómo decolonizar absolutamente todo lo que pasa en nuestra región, sobre todo porque es que estamos directamente debajo, ¿no? de uno de los países que hoy en día, bueno, hoy en día no, que ha tenido mayor poder económico y político. Entonces, el mensaje de más que una breve boca es cómo comenzar a darle estructura a esta conversación e incorporar todas las observaciones que hemos tenido, lo que se ha discutido aquí en el panel, y agradecerles. Y el último mensaje es que hay que seguir empujando esta agenda, porque sí tenemos que cambiar lo que está sucediendo, sin ninguna duda, y no ceder. O sea, llegó el momento de que ya no podemos ceder respecto a esto. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. Pascal, please.
Just to not keep you away from your lunch, I just want to really appreciate the opportunity to start having this conversation. I'm sure I was one of those whose frustration you could hear. I do think that given how disruptive this time is, history will judge us for what we have done with this opportunity. So we really do need to take advantage of the opportunities that there are, pull up our socks, and decide what it is we want in terms of moving forward. And I really sincerely hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation, and it is one that we can pick up and move forward with.
Great. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for staying till the end. I think one of the ways that we were thinking to continue that conversation is really to use the IBP power shifting community of practice, and also the ICFP subcommittee on power shifting. So this community, we are planning to keep it alive after ICFP and to continue have these conversations and continue to ideate and recreate sort of the community and the power that we want to see, and also to be disruptive, to be combative when we can, and to really to reimagine the world that we want to see. So thank you all, everyone, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of ICFP. Thanks.